Hello, everyone. Welcome to a very special Broccoli Rising, where I have the great pleasure of introducing you to Margot Livesey. Margot is the author of 10 novels, including her most recent, The Road from Belhaven, as well as a collection of short stories and The Hidden Machinery, a book about crafting fiction. Margot's honors include, oh wow, fellowships from the Guggenheim Foundation, the NEA, the Massachusetts Artists Foundation, and the Canada Council for the Arts. She has taught at every writer's workshop you ever wanted to be part of, and she is currently on the faculty of the Iowa Writers' Workshop. Margot is from Scotland, and that's where she sets her new book. But The Road from Belhaven is set in the 19th century. It's the story of Lizzie Craig, who grows up on a farm in the care of her grandparents and discovers she has the power of second sight. She can see the future sometimes, but she can't control it. The Road from Belhaven is sort of a prequel to Margot's book, Eva Moves the Furniture, which involves another protagonist with the power or curse of the supernatural. On the page, Margot has captivating lyricism, but a punch of a message and sly humor where you don't expect it. She's that way in real life, too. She's one of my favorite novelists, and I'm honored to say she's my friend. Please welcome Margot Livesey.
Ellen, thank you for that wonderful, eloquent introduction. I'm a little abashed at how you describe me, but I'm very, very touched. And our friendship is a long and treasured part of my life. I think we've now been friends for considerably more than 20 years, which is a very happy thing for me.
For me too, and it's an unusual kind of friendship in that we do not see each other often, but every time we do, the connection is there for me. It's instantaneous. You're the best kind of friend.
And happily, although there may be longish intervals between meetings, I have the pleasure of Broccoli Rising coming into my inbox with a reassuring frequency and bringing me wonderful recipes and ideas, and in general, making me feel better about life on the planet.
Oh, wow. Now, okay, I need to focus. Congratulations on the road from Belhaven. I am still under its spell, and maybe spell is the word to use. You always write with such lush prose, but there is a lot underneath it that I think readers may not notice. You fold fact details so neatly into your narrative, from when Lizzie gets a job as a locomotive tracer in Glasgow to what the weather is like. And what is that word I love? Dreish?
A Dreich day is a gloomy, damp day. It could be raining or it could just feel damp. I think in Miami you may be a little deprived of Dreich days, but here in Boston, where I'm talking today, we have plenty of them.
There is that underpinning of detail and research that makes this book so fully alive, even on sunny days in Miami. What goes into research for you, and how do you know when it's enough?
I think that's a fabulous question. And I think the answer as to how I know when it's enough is when, on the one hand, when my friend, the wonderful novelist and story writer Andrea Barrett, tells me so. Um, but on the other hand, just looking at books I admire and trying to see how, for instance, Penelope Fitzgerald or Colm Toibin uses details. How much do they feel they have to use to create their very satisfying fictional worlds? And sometimes it's just a matter of thinking myself into the situation by reading diaries and letters of the period. So, for instance, at one point, Lizzie Craig had a doll's tea party, something I did as a child. But then I realized reading letters of the period that most people just had one doll.
Hmm.
So you had to have a very select party with your doll. You were the only guest. So there were moments like that when I just had to really remember how many material goods we tend to have nowadays and how far fewer luxuries people had at all levels of society in the 19th century.
There is another fact detail underpinning in The Road from Belhaven in the character of Lizzie Craig and her ability of second sight. Tell us a little more about that.
My mother, Eva McEwen, was the school nurse at the boys' private school where my father taught on the edge of the Scottish Highlands. It was founded in 1847 by William Gladstone, shortly before he became Prime Minister. And his ambition for the school was it was going to be for the sons of clergymen, and it would keep these young men pure by being way out in the country. Let us not speculate about Gladstone's thinking. Um, but in this very masculine world, my mother, Eva McEwen, was one of the few women, and she and my father ended up getting married. She died when I was 2.5, and I grew up knowing not very many things about her, but among the things I did gradually find out was that she had a strong relationship with the supernatural. And this took two forms that people spoke of. One was that her patients as a nurse would be visited by poltergeists, which they found noisy and disruptive. And the other was that she saw people who were not visible to most other people. If you're going to have a dead mother, then having a dead mother who's acquainted with the supernatural seems a really marvelous thing. And eventually, over many years, I turned the very small amount of facts that I had about her into a highly imagined novel, Eva Moves the Furniture.
I was looking for my copy before this interview, and I felt like Eva had moved my copy of the book too. It was not where I expected it.
She's liable to do that. You have to watch it, Ellen.
I am struck by the power and weight of secrets in The Road from Belhaven and Eva Moves the Furniture. Both Eva and Lizzie know better than to share certain things about themselves. I was wondering where that came from. Were there things you were told not to say?
As a child, I think I grew up with a very strong sense that there were many, many things you weren't allowed to say. And that the adults around me were very good at not saying. So, conversations always seem to happen on two levels. One was sort of the polite chit chat, and then beneath that, often quite savage insults were perhaps being made. But I should just going back to your first question, I should have said that, of course, the fact that my mother had these supernatural gifts, if you will, made me feel very excited, very thrilled when I discovered that my great grandmother, Lizzie Craig, also had a relationship with the supernatural, and that hers took the form of second sight. And of course, I know about this because people told me about it. I never met any of my grandparents, let alone my great grandparents. But I should say that in Lizzie's life, her real life, her gift was not a secret. People knew that she saw the future. So this was very much a product of my imagination. And I think you're right, it's probably a product of how I grew up when almost nothing important could really be said. And I think often the signals I got about what mustn't be said were just kind of subtly delivered. And I tried to suggest that for my character Lizzie, that it's not like anyone says, you're daft or what are you talking about? She just gradually understands she shouldn't mention this.
I had a very similar feeling when I was growing up, and that was why I turned to fiction. I felt like it could tell you things that grown-ups wouldn't.
Interesting. And this was growing up in Florida. You should have come to the Scottish Highlands. You'd have been at home.
You have not yet had your family's gift of seeing the future, but you've written about it. So where do you stand on the supernatural?
I I think, I'm like many people in that I secretly believe this seemingly very irrational thing, while at the same time being completely skeptical about sightings of Elvis at the supermarket, for but I think that when I talk to people individually, as I often get to do after readings, either from Eva Moves the Furniture or The Road from Belhaven, a surprising number of people have some small story about something that happened that made them feel there was something beyond the real world of appearances. I believe that my mother had this relationship with the supernatural. I believe that my great grandmother did. And I have a few other friends who can see the future. And but for them, it's a very everyday thing.
Hmm.
And they very seldom talk about it.
Let's talk about Jane Eyre. How old were you when you first read Charlotte Bronte's novel?
The rule was that I could read whatever books I could reach on my father's bookcase. And one of the pleasures of Jane Eyre was that when I started reading it, I was the same age as Jane. I was 10 years old. That, of course, immediately took me into the book. And we lived on the edge of the Scottish moors, so moors were very familiar to me. And then I went for a number of years myself to a terrible girls' school,
Mm.
which was very like Lowood Hall in Jane Eyre. And so I felt like I shared a great many things with Jane Eyre.
Lizzie, in particular, isn't an angel. She's flawed. So are some of the other characters in the book. Though no one in The Road from Belhaven is blind to bad behavior or excuses it, they hold each other gently. I was wondering how much of that is part of your quiet campaign for civility. And I wonder if people watching even remember what civility tastes like. What made you start it, and how can we play too?
Uh, yeah, my campaign for civility began for various reasons quietly in 2016. And I tried in the novel I went on to write called The Boy in the Field, to write a novel in which no one swore, which my editor complained was unrealistic, but I stuck to my guns. Um, and I'm pleased to say that in The Road from Belhaven, people are mostly very, very polite, very courteous. And partly, of course, setting a novel in the 1880s, it's easier for people, I think, to believe in politeness. And partly, I think I wanted to write a novel in which everybody was complicated and everybody was capable of compassion. And I wanted Lizzie to be someone who often acts in her own worst interests, but still has strong loyalties and forms strong attachments. And I think one of the things about growing up in the community of the boys' school, as I did, is that it's a great lesson in you sort of have to make the best of the people you have around you. They're not going to disappear next week or next year. So you do all sort of put your best foot forward and try to appreciate each other. And I think city dwelling can sometimes make us a little casual or cavalier with our relationships. We feel like maybe we can just replace people. Well, in the 1880s, people were irreplaceable.
If you're watching this, you may guess that I am Margot's slobbering fan. It's true, but she has this effect on other beings. She met my dog Darcy several years ago, and my dog, like, when you walked into the room, her eyes opened wide, like, "Oh yes, she is here." And you do write so compassionately about animals. They're not just the backdrop in your books. There's the bees in The Missing World. There's Lily, the lovely dog in The Boy in the Field. There's Mercury, the racehorse. And in The Road from Belhaven, there's Alice, a jackdaw, I believe. And they have a certain gravitas and wisdom. So I am wondering about the role of animals in your books and in your life.
Oh, I'm so pleased to think about Darcy. She was such a lovely dog, and of course that she was named for a character in Pride and Prejudice, only made me love her more. I did grow up with dogs, and I grew up also with many farm animals around. And I'd have to say, for many years, the animals seemed more reliable in terms of companionship and understanding and wisdom than the adults around me. So I did feel a very strong bond with the family dog, and I didn't keep a jackdaw as a child like Lizzie does, but I did keep pigeons for a few years. And I think there's a way that animals enlarge our lives, both in in the real world, as we call it, and in fiction.
Tell me about your start as a writer. You teach at MFA programs, but that's not how you began writing yourself.
And my start as a writer was, I'd have to say, wobbly and incoherent. At university, writing wasn't taught at the time that I went. I studied literature and philosophy. And then after university, I went traveling with my boyfriend at the time, who was writing a book about philosophy of science. And when I got bored watching him, I decided I'd join in and I'd write my own book. But of course, I didn't have a subject like he did. So I decided to write a novel. And I wrote a very bad novel in a year that we spent traveling together. And when I reread it, I was really interested in the badness. I thought, how can I've just emerged from 3 years of reading To the Lighthouse and Middlemarch. Why did I write something so unbelievably dreary? And that got my attention. So I started trying to get better by writing short stories. They fit between my lunch and dinner shifts as a waitress. Eventually, the stories crept into little magazines, of which probably most people have never heard, but they paved the way to my getting my first teaching job at Tufts University. And at first, I found teaching a great mistake after waitressing. It was so time consuming. The students never tipped me. Um, in fact, they mostly complained about their grades. But gradually, I got a little more efficient as a teacher, and I was seduced really by the pleasure of getting to reread, of being paid to read Mavis Gallant or Alice Munro or Toni Morrison. So that was immensely seductive.
You have ties to Scotland, London, Cambridge, Brisbane, where recently discovered you have family, and maybe elsewhere. So where is home for you?
I think I have two homes. One is the living room of my flat in London, which I bought with my waitressing money many years ago. And it's my favorite, I think it's my favorite room in the world. And the other is the feeling I have when I'm back in Scotland and walking in the hills or walking by the River Tay, and the landscape is just so familiar to me, and I can read it in a certain way. I can recognize all the birds. I know all the plants. I just don't have to think about it. And then there is the home that I have in the world through books, probably my first home and my most enduring home, in that I can carry them with me and keep reading them.
Because Broccoli Rising is food focused, what food tastes like home to you?
Now, I thought about this quite a bit before our conversation, because I will say that The Road from Belhaven is not a gourmet novel. We do not have many lavish meals in The Road from Belhaven. A food that tastes to me like home, I would say porridge, oatmeal, and oat cakes. Certain kinds of cheeses taste like home. A fried egg butty. A fried egg butty is a kind of soft roll that you can get in Scotland, and with a fried egg, it's extremely delicious. And certain kinds of fish, smoked fish, salmon, are very homelike. Big thing in Edinburgh is jacket potatoes, which I'm very partial to. So, not many gourmet things. My childhood was a long, in some ways, not very successful battle against not eating meat. So, most of my meals consisted of eating round the meat, which meant I was eating potatoes and carrots, potatoes and peas, potatoes and Brussels sprouts,
Do you get to eat those foods when you're writing? So what do you eat when you're writing?
But I should say, I forgot to say that there's also baking and things like scones.
Which appear in the road from Belhaven.
Yeah, and, a lovely Victoria sponge cake. Now
Right.
those foods feel like home. What foods do I eat when I'm writing? But basically when I'm writing, I think I'm trying not to eat so much and to go to the gym more often, but I have a cheese sandwich for lunch practically every day. And then, in summer, I know lots of fruit, lots of local fruit if I'm in Britain, somewhat local fruit if I'm in Boston.
I have said, and I still hold to it, that if you ever need a writer's retreat, I would cater it for you. Thank you so much. You are such a pleasure, such a wonderful writer, such a wonderful friend.
Thank you, dear Ellen, for this wonderful conversation. And there are all kinds of questions I would like to ask you about writing and food writers you admire, but perhaps that will be part of the next time we meet.
I would love it. Be well, Margot, and everyone watching. Thank you so much for joining me and Margot Livesey on Broccoli Rising.